From Uber Technologies, General Manager Andy Hung, and from the Catalyst Group, Alex Eaton.
Good morning. My name is Alex Eaton, and I work for the Catalyst Group based out of Kansas City and do governmental affairs for Uber for the state of Missouri. And my guest today is Andy Hung.
Hi, my name is Andy Hung. I'm the general manager for Uber in Kansas and Missouri. I started at Uber nearly 3 years ago to launch Kansas City. Back then it was a team of just two of us, and literally I would answer personally every driver email that we had. And that team has since grown to over 20 and expanded to St. Louis, Columbia, and very excited that 2 months ago we launched here in Springfield.
So the first question, Andy, is I think what has launching an Uber, I believe it took maybe a year. What was kind of the learning curve for Uber as that process unfolded and ultimately became on the network?
Yeah, so really two pieces there. First of all, obviously we're a very data-driven company, and we knew for a while that there was a lot of interest in Springfield. Tens of thousands of people had opened the app to take a look, were their cars here yet, whether at the airport or visiting or students coming back for school. So we knew that there was a lot of interest. And then working to get the regulations right, and obviously you've been very close to this, but great partnership with the City Council and the business community, particularly Mayor Pro Tem Ken McClure, to really make it happen, and really excited that I think we've got a model set of regulations that, as you know, we've been talking about in Jeff City and hope to, and really excited about the possibility of further expanding across the state of Missouri.
How has Uber overall impacted transportation in cities in Missouri and across the country?
Yeah, so I mean, even just in Springfield, we're still just 2 months in, but it is one of the fastest growing cities of this size that we've been in, and been really excited about that. I took a look at the numbers the other day, and just looking at kind of where people take the most rides. People from 180 different cities have already taken a ride in Springfield, which is awesome and really great to see. Over 500 drivers have done a trip on the system since we started, obviously peaking with a very big New Year's Eve. If anyone here in the audience has had a chance to take one over New Year's Eve. But it's also really cool to see, I think very similar to a lot of cities, the vast majority of drivers on the system, over 50%, drive fewer than 10 hours a week. So this is something that's a very flexible opportunity that you can kind of fit around the rest of your life. And real quick, kind of wanted to throw this open to the audience. Any guesses on the top pickup and drop-off spots so far? Just shout them out. Okay, yep, airport is definitely one. So the Expo Center is another one. The Glois Theater is another top 5. The bars and restaurants on Walnut Street, and of course, student housing, Missouri State. So, and another thing that's been really interesting to see, I think, especially among cities the size of Springfield, and this kind of goes back to the regulatory piece. We've seen, because we're able to make it easy enough for drivers to get on the platform, taking a look at New Year's Eve and comparing to cities about the same size, the ETAs were shorter and the prices were cheaper. There was less surge pricing during New Year's Eve, and I think a big part of that is because the regulatory framework has made it possible to run an efficient business and benefit riders and drivers in Springfield.
Next question, speaking of innovation, how has innovation driven the company culture for Uber, and how does that kind of drive the day-to-day approach for the company?
Yeah, so we start with first principles when we think about how we do things. So the mission statement that we have at Uber is transportation as reliable as running water for everybody everywhere. And that has and that plays out in a lot of different ways. Going back to your last question, having this universal app makes it very easy that when you come to a new city, you don't really need to know your way around. You just put your destination in, and a car picks you up 3 to 4 minutes, and you get out, close the door, and you don't have to think about it anymore. And a lot of what we do works backward from how do we get to that point. So we see kind of the results of this business model, across the board. We talked about how it's easier to go from one city to another very seamlessly. 180 different cities people come from to take a ride in Springfield. But we also see things like DUI reduction, for example. We've worked really closely with MAD to see what we can do to contribute to the reduction of DUI. And actually, I just did a talk at Tech Week in Kansas City, and we showed a map, or a graph rather, of DUI incidents per hour throughout the day, and then overlaid that against demand for Uber services. And it was amazing how tightly they matched up. I wish I had an image here I could show everybody, but that's one kind of output and something that we strive for at Uber in terms of culture and what we're shooting for. We actually there was a study that Temple University did. And they took a look at the impact of ride sharing. This is a couple years ago, before we were in over 400 cities. And what they found was that if ride sharing existed basically in every city, that could save up to 500 lives a year. So that's really central to our mission and what drives a lot of the innovation. I think another piece of it as well, that as you see ride sharing evolving, it moves the use case beyond what you initially would think of for point-to-point transportation. So traditionally, taxis have done very well in maybe wealthier areas or more densely populated areas. But with point-to-point transportation, and you don't need to call up and have a cab arrive maybe half an hour from now, and it's 3 to 4 minutes away. That opens up a lot of new use cases. We've taken a look in Chicago, for example. 40% of trips begin in what is officially designated as an underserved area. So that's really exciting to see. Los Angeles, again, kind of expanding use cases. We've taken a look at this, and over the first 3 years we were there, the for-hire industry, kind of broadly including taxis and limos and ride sharing, has increased 400%. So we're using innovation to increase the pie and what's possible in terms of getting a ride from A to B. We talk, and you know this because you've been working very closely on the regulatory piece for drivers, but obviously getting a framework where we're able to have a business model that's really flexible on the driver side. We think about Uber as a ride on demand, but it's probably not as emphasized as much that it's also work on demand. If you're on the driving side, this is something where you can push a button, work for a couple hours, and then turn it off when you're done, when you've got another job or family obligations, or you want to go to the gym. We've often seen that this is the very last thing that people schedule during their day, that it's the kind of work that fits around the rest of your life. So that's another thing we think about when we're innovating.
What are some of the challenges that Uber has faced while innovating and trying to expand in different municipalities across the country?
Yeah, so I think a big challenge for us, and what we like to think about, is Uber's kind of seen as a disruptive technology, and part of what we're trying to keep in mind is we want to continually be disrupting ourselves, and our thought is that if we don't do what someone else is going to, so we want to keep pushing forward to keep innovating. A good example, when Uber first started, we were it was just a black car service. So this the idea started with kind of traditional limo drivers who might have a shift early in the morning and then a shift later on in the evening, and they wanted to fill their spare time where you could just sit around and read a newspaper and kind of wait. So they would turn on their app and pick up a couple extra rides between these. And we were taking a look at P2P, kind of what you would think of as UberX, which is the service that we operate in Springfield. The sort of the business school philosophy is, why would you move from this high margin kind of luxury idea to something that isn't that. And our thought was that if we don't do this, someone else is going to, and that really fits with the overall mission of transportation is reliable as running water everywhere for everyone. So. The big next step there in the kind of logical progression that we've decided to disrupt ourselves again is Uber Pool. Anybody in the audience taken an Uber Pool in one of the bigger cities, Chicago, or yeah? So for people who aren't kind of familiar with this yet, the idea is that a couple people going from one neighborhood to another can share a ride with another rider going the same way. So just kind of using round numbers, something that might be a $10 ride would be $6 for each individual person, and then so that overall ride is worth 12. So the driver's making more, riders are paying less. So it's kind of a win-win. A lot of what we think about for our approach to innovation is how can we, in a very metrics-driven way, lower the price for a ride. So how do we make this more affordable and reliable for riders? But how can we also increase the economics on the driver's side? So we think about cost per ride on the rider side, and then on the driver's side, we think about earnings per hour, and how can we make a more efficient system so that we're able to improve both of those metrics at once. And that what that really means is thinking about the three states that are possible when you're a driver logged into the app. You're waiting for a ride, you're driving to a ride, or you actually have a rider in the back, and we want to maximize that last piece of it. So continuing to iterate there and get better is a big focus of what my team is looking at.
Can you touch on how Uber targets other cities and why there's a need for a statewide ordinance versus just saying, okay, we've launched in Springfield, let's go to Nixa, let's go to Ozark?
Yeah, so I think what's really, and you probably have a good insight here too, but what's really made Uber successful, I think, is that it's this universal app. No matter where you are, you can just turn it on, you can put in your destination, and a ride will come and pick you up. And being able to do that and have that work city by city is a real strong benefit. And I know you were talking about a story the other day where not being able to sort of have a universal plan in place actually was a pretty obvious impediment to being able to get around.
So the other day, Monday was Inauguration Day, so we elected a new governor here in Missouri, and it was estimated 10,000 people were in Jeff City, and I think there's one cab company. So the cab driver obviously is like, we cannot meet the demand needed. So Uber, what Uber can do is a one-day pop-up service. So they recruit drivers, they do all the marketing. So Uber had, I think, 150 drivers on the network just for one day. And if anyone knows Jefferson City, there's a town called Apache Flats, literally a mile from the city limits. And some legislators' families stayed there and they couldn't get Uber because it's not in the city limits. And so that kind of hit, a light bulb went off in their head that said, this is the perfect example of why we need a statewide ordinance, because it's literally 1 mile away. So what they did was they would drive into the city, get picked up, go to the Capitol. But when they were in the city limits, they can get dropped off back outside of Jefferson City. So for example here, if you went to a Cardinals baseball game and got picked up, dropped off in Nixa, the driver cannot pick up a passenger in Nixa. So it's a one-way, drive. So it's a detriment to the driver. So that's one way just to create one ordinance so they can use, it's not a patchwork framework. And, St. Louis has 86 municipalities, so it'd be a disaster to go try to cover 86 ordinances.
Yeah, and that's very, as we were talking about before, very central to the idea of being as reliable as running water, everywhere, and being able to have that extra opportunity for drivers to drop off, to be able to pick up somewhere else, and have a seamless transition.
Well, I think that wraps up our conversation. Feel free to join us in the conversation hall after this if you have any specific questions for both Andy and myself. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.